Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. You're here for the event called Assessing the Drivers of Deforestation Implications for Policy Making. I want to welcome our panelists and you, the audience. We'll give you a minute to settle. Please come forward. It's always nicer for panelists to see faces, and it will make interactions more fruitful. Please don't hesitate. Just a quick reminder, if you need interpretation, you should have little headsets. I think there's interpretation in Korean, French, and Spanish. And welcome again. So, as I mentioned, we're here to hear about how to assess drivers of deforestation and what are the implications for policymaking. My name is Estelle Fache. I work for the Secretariat of the Central African Forest Initiative, which we'll talk a little bit about this initiative later. But first of all, I want to thank FAO and Korea Forest Service for organizing this buzzing World Forestry Congress. I know it's after lunchtime, but we're on day 4, and I don't see the intensity of interactions diminishing. So it's quite amazing. I know you've heard a lot, and I hope that you'll come with something and come up with questions for our super distinguished panelists today. This session is part of sub-theme 1, Turning the Tide, Reversing Deforestation and Forest Degradation. What I want to do now is present the agenda of the session. First, we'll have Dr. Maria José Sanz. She'll deliver a keynote speech to frame the discussion. Then we'll have 4 panelists that will make short presentation on the work they've been doing to better understand and monitor deforestation dynamics. And then we'll have a panel discussion and a discussion with you, and then Harold Engelsen will share his thoughts to conclude the session. And at the very end, we'll have a super nice video, so please stick to the very end to illustrate the conversion of forests to palm oil plantations in Angola, in the region of Angola. As I mentioned, there's interpretations. I know you'll probably have questions. You'll just have to wait for the Q&A part to ask them. And for those of us that I welcome as well that join us online, please put them in the chat, and we'll find a way for me to relay it back to the audience. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker today, Maria José Sanz. I have actually known her for a really long time. She's really famous in those circles. She's an INCA-BAS research professor and the scientific director of the BAS Center for Climate Change. Dr. Sanz is an expert on air pollution effects, on atmospheric dynamics and chemistry, and nitrogen and carbon cycles. She's been working on multilateral processes. This is when I met her, when she was working with the UNFCCC, so related to climate change and land use since 2000. Now, these days, she focuses on the complexity and the needs of knowledge integration around socio-ecological transition and how sustainable land management can contribute to it while integrating mitigation and adaptation to climate change in very complex socio-ecological systems. Dr. Sanz has more than 400 publications, mostly on air pollution, climate change, and land use. And Maria, if you can hear us, we're all ears for you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this long and nice introduction. Well, today, maybe we can put on the slides for the presentation. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, well, I just prepared a small outline to introduce what I want to speak about, but basically I will introduce a few figures of deforestation. I will speak a little bit of drivers, what they are, what types we have, and then, just a few words about what we need to do beyond monitoring, and a little of 3-4 concluding remarks. Next, please. I introduced this slide here because what I want to show basically is that what you see is deforestation rates in different regions on one side, and on the other side is the protected areas increase between 1990, more or less, 2015, 2020. And here what you see is that the regions where deforestation, net deforestation is higher, basically are the protection has been increasing. So illustrating that protection, it seems to be not enough for stopping deforestation. So if we go to the next slide, please. What we see, next slide, please. What we see is the evolution of the tree cover. I mean, tree cover is one indicator that can give us an idea of deforestation. And you see that globally, there is still an increase. There's up and downs, but there is still an increase, in particular on the tropical areas worldwide. Next, please. Monitoring is important. Yes, why monitoring is important? Well, first of all, because monitoring can be done by different groups, and here you see monitoring by different actors, governmental or non-governmental actors. And in general, the trends they are more or less the same, but there are differences, and this could help to trigger discussions about why and how deforestation is happening, which is always a good thing to do. So monitoring is being contributing fundamentally to understand better deforestation. Next, please. But the drivers of deforestation are multiple, and as you can, I mean, as you know, most of you know, they have been divided in two big groups of drivers: the proximate or direct drivers of deforestation and forest degradation, which are basically human activities and actions that are directly impacting, and they result in the loss of carbon stocks and finally even leading to deforestation. And other drivers which are more difficult to sometimes to track and understand, which are the underlying or indirect drivers. And those are complex interactions of social, economical, political, cultural, and technological processes that can affect those proximate drivers I was talking before, and also that usually they start by pushing degradation and finally end up on deforestation. Next slide, please. Here, I don't want you to have this long list or read this long list, but you have an idea here about what are the types of actions, human actions that lead to deforestation, and they can be called proximate drivers. And just to mention one, clear cut for logging, for example, or infrastructure construction are proximate drivers of deforestation. And then there are others which can be seen as causes for degradation that at the end it may end up in deforestation. And here we have, for example, overgrazing or small scale mining, etc. Next slide, please. So next, please. So as you can see here, there is the underlying drivers on the lower part, right? So some are related to demographic factors, economy, technology, policy, and cultural. But if we go to the next, please. What you see here is one interpretation of what are the drivers by regions. And as you see here, the drivers can be different in different regions. In one region can be more urban expansion. In another region, it could be a predominant driver, the agriculture. So we cannot generalize that globally there is one single driver driving deforestation. And of course, there is also interesting to see that sometimes those are connected to degradation drivers, also different in different regions. Next, please. But why we are talking about drivers? Well, there's been a proliferation of studies about drivers recently, from meta-analysis to using Global Forest Watch that illustrate and monitors globally the deforestation, but also helps to identify where the hotspots for deforestation are, and therefore they can be related to drivers. Spatial and temporal deep learning methods are being used as well recently. Next slide, please. But there is also other types of analysis, spatial econometric analysis, probability assessment, using integrated machine learning algorithms. geospatial approach seems to be quite being common, and also spatial temporal dynamics and even partial least square path modeling. So modeling is getting more and more. And what I want to say also is that, let's say that the scales are very different. So the studies are going from very little scales, municipal, to regional or global scales. Next, please. And one recent study just to reach the same conclusion, and I'm going to reach here, which is that different methods are not exclusive and they are complementary. So we have to make sure that these monitoring tools we have now, like spatial modeling and as well as remote sensing, can be combined with other types of surveys that are more giving us data that relates to these underlying drivers we were talking before that are quite or could be quite complex. Next. And why we need to go beyond monitoring. Monitoring, as I said, we will see today, is extremely interesting and extremely useful, but there are other factors, and we have to understand that there are drivers that can act on international scale, and therefore there are international instruments that can help on addressing them. There is also regional and national forces, which are important and we need to consider when addressing and understanding drivers. And also there are forces and actions that are acting at the local level, and therefore we have to consider these three levels when we are talking about drivers of deforestation. Next. And here you have, for example, that there are several layers. You can go from the forestry itself, understanding, the legal forest value chains, the community-based forestry, but you also need to go to the governance level and understand what are the legal and policy frameworks. And the governance of tenure, for example, is being seen as extremely important. And why not, and not less importantly, we need to also look into the landscapes, understanding what are the agricultural forces there, or understanding what are the pathways for restoration, land use, planning, etc. And finally, what I want to conclude, next, please. Next, please. Is that the advances in acquiring consistent time series and geospatial data, which is being tremendously moved forward, are important. They help us to identify hotspots and sometimes direct drivers, but they are not enough. And the underlying drivers of deforestation, they require more complex approaches. So they require combining methodologies as some of the ones we've been seeing earlier, and an interdisciplinary approach combining geospatial, land cover, and land use data with other approaches as surveys or economic analysis can really reveal or can help to understand the complexities of these underlying drivers. So with this, I wish you a very good discussion in the panel today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maria. Thanks for framing this so clearly. And I can tell you in the room, there's many people who were taking pictures of your presentation. So there's definitely interest. It was really useful to get to the same understanding before we dive down with our 4 panelists that I'm going to welcome, 3 of them that I'm going to welcome to the stage, and one who's connected remotely. So online, we have Frédéric Achard from the Joint Research Center. We also have Rémi D'Annunzio from FAO, Augusto Castro from the Center, the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, CIAT, and Ray Thomas Fernandez Cabington from the Forest Management Bureau of the Philippines. Let's just welcome them. And we'll start with Frédéric. Frédéric Achard is a senior scientist from the JRC, the Joint Research Center. He's based in Italy on the ISPRA site. He has a university from the beautiful Toulouse University in France, and he joined the JRC in 1992. What he really likes and what he researches at the moment are the development of Earth observation techniques for the global monitoring of forest resources and the assessment of implication of forest cover changes on the global carbon budget. He's a very prolific author with 107 peer-reviewed papers, and almost 10,000 citations. Frédéric, welcome. He's going to talk to us about the objectives and the methods for the EU Observatory on the World's Forest and how it supports efforts to enhance traceability and transparency of value chains related to deforestation and forest degradation. Welcome, Frédéric.
Good afternoon to everybody in Seoul. Thanks, Estelle, for these nice words. I have a few slides to illustrate my talk. Yeah, please, thanks. So as Estelle is mentioning, I will introduce briefly what are the objectives and the content of this establishment of this observatory. It's established by the European Commission, by the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, and and I will show in the next slide what are the objectives and the main content. So we are establishing this observatory in the framework of regulation of the European Union, which is aimed at minimizing the effect of the consumptions of commodities like cocoa, oil, palm oil, cattle, etc. The effect of these consumptions on deforestation and forest degradation. So the objective of the observatory is to provide transparent information to help to achieve this goal of minimizing this effect. So, and the key activities of this observatory are mainly to monitor change in the forest cover and forest degradation globally. That's one first key objective. The second one is to monitor the consumption and production of commodities and products which are possibly associated with deforestation and forest degradation. And then we'll conduct a feasibility study to try to link the two first components. In the next slide, I illustrate the activities which will be carried out for the first component. So we are developed a system which monitors the disturbances in the cover of tropical moist forest cover, in particular the deforestation and forest degradation, the long-term disturbances and what we call the short-term disturbances. This system is working on an annual basis, and it's already available. The web link is provided in the slide, and we are just released. On the slide, you see that the kind of outputs, publications that we are making use of this system. So we have published a report on the Amazon, on the Amazon countries. And the graphics shows for example, give an example of the monitoring of deforestation that are the red bars and the degradation, the yellow bars on the legal Amazon over a 20 years period. And we are just releasing the results for the year 2021. I have 3 more slides. The next one shows what are the activities on the monitoring of the trade component. So if you can just pass to the next slide, please. On the trade, we know that deforestation is linked to the production of biocommodities, and so we need to in our observatory we will monitor both the production of commodities in the third countries and the trade flows between the third countries and the European Union. So we have 2 more slides. The next slide shows what is this the illustration of the monitoring of the production. So if you can pass to next slide, please. The following slide shows the production, the system, some example. Next slide, please. I see, I don't know if it's, yeah, please. So we will provide this information, show on observatory first what are by countries, what are the production of commodities, and that change the trends over the years that allows to feed the system of benchmarking, understanding how the countries are changing, are evolving related to these commodities. In the next slide, we show that also we monitor the trade between the European Union, the 27 countries of the European Union, and the third countries, the other countries. That allows, and showing also the change between 1 year and another one will give us a kind of system of alarm of what is maybe considered as critical commodities. All these data are based on this monitoring of trade is based on existing databases that we will compile and present in a suitable and appropriate way. So that's basically it from my side. I will be happy to answer to the questions and in the next when the panel or discussion will be open. Thank you, and I give the floor back to the next panelist.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Acha. First of all, thank you for your remarkable timekeeping, and I'm going to challenge the next speakers to do as well. But also, you know, it's the products that you've been showing, we actually use them a lot in CAFI, and especially the super long-term, like 20 years analysis of deforestation and degradation. And so thank you very much for this, and we'll keep the questions for just a little bit later. Our next speaker is Rémi D'Annunzio from the Food and Agriculture Organizations of the United Nations, FAO. Rémi is a forestry officer. He focuses on forest monitoring and climate change for the Africa region. He provides technical support to FAO capacity development programs to improve forest and land use data analysis and reporting, and also to enhance understanding and action needed to address the drivers of deforestation and forest degradation. He's also actively supporting the development of free and open source solutions for Earth observations and monitoring within the Open Forest Initiative. Rémi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Estelle. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody is doing fine. Could we have the slide? Thank you very much. I'm going to try to keep the time and briefly show you an example of synthesizing those methods that have been partially showed by Frederick and by Maria on what tools are available out there for assessing drivers of deforestation and degradation, and how we have packaged them into a suite of methods and tools in a Central Africa project funded by CAFI. And I would like to show you those very quick aspects and the packaging that we've done on those methods. So the aim was to make available replicable methods to detect deforestation and degradation. We specifically focused on evaluating recent trends of deforestation and degradation. We looked at 2015 to 2020. We wanted to identify and to quantify the drivers associated to both deforestation and degradation. And we wanted to use that information to develop decision tools that could potentially support land use planning. And we've done that with 3 ideas in mind. The first one was that the methods that we would propose would be very robust, very transparent, and very reproducible. And to do that, we would rely on open source solutions. The second one is that we really insisted on having a very active participation of both local actors and academia and civil society. And the last one was to focus on capacity building. So those 3 aspects, I'll show you in 3 slides. On the methods and tools, we really wanted to use open source methods that are robust, that are transparent. And for that, we use the cloud computing platform CEPA, which has been developed by FAO. Within the platform, we used the time series analysis to take advantage of the huge resources of data that is available out there now, that have been made available to the public for the past 10 years, I would say. And the processing that can be done with those solutions, with those open and cloud computing solutions, are technological approaches that were not possible a couple of years ago. And we have now the means to implement this kind of analysis very easily. And we have developed the modules that can implement them quickly. Next slide, please. The second aspect is, so the tools are open source. The data are also using all that's available, but we also took a huge benefit in using the data that NICFI provided, providing unprecedented access to very high resolution, both spatially and temporally. And the cadence of the planet data that's been available in this program is key, because the change that we're looking at, especially degradation, it can be quite subtle. And especially in very tropical, dense forest, you can have degradation and selective logging, and it can recover very quickly. And the data that is there, planet data, really helped us validate and see those changes that can be subtle. And as you can see, we identified drivers of deforestation and degradation around the points that we identified and confirmed as change. And we only, of course, looked at what can be done from satellite imagery, so which is more or less the direct drivers that Maria was talking about earlier. But still, a data set that has been a real game changer for those interpretations. And then the last slide, please. The last slide is we really tried to provide better access. So this better access could be guaranteed through a very transparent process. Everything that has been produced in the project has been published almost immediately on the website that is out there. You have the URL if you want to check what's there. You need to speak French, so. We also had a multi-stakeholder technical committee meeting very often with different universities, academia, and technical experts that provided their insights on how it should be done. We really wanted to make sure that this could be replicated, and so by making this available, we are now able to reproduce the methods, for instance, at the moment in West Africa, where the similar data and results will be soon available. And I would just invite you to go and check the URL where you will find all the aspects and tools and results. I think I'm done. Yeah,
very nice. Thank you so much. No, thank you. Really, it's exciting new, better tool. Relying on better data with better access, what more do we want? And I don't know if you missed the hyperlink that Remy provided. It's really fun to go play around that data that you can sort by country, by type of disturbance, by driver. It's really nicely done. Thank you. So transitioning to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Augusto Castro Nunes. He's a global theme leader of low-emission food system and leader of the climate security and peace-building nexus research at the Alliance of Biodiversity and International Center for Tropical Agriculture. He used to be part of the Peruvian climate change negotiating team, and his studying interest is how climate finance can work in tandem with and towards the achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals. Dr. Castro Nunes is an agricultural engineer by training. He has a master's in environmental economics and a PhD in geography from the University of Copenhagen, Denmark. So, Dr. Castro, I'd love to hear from you on your analysis of underlying drivers of deforestation in times of conflicts and in times of peace.
Thank you so much. Yes. I think that Maria's presentation as well as Remy's presentation were fantastic as a back information for my presentation. Now I want to speak of what we do, social scientists, with data. And I want to present this in a specific context. The context of Colombia is a country which is emerging from conflict, recently signed a peace agreement with a guerrilla group, the FARC. And the country have high priorities for reducing emissions from deforestation, but as well high priorities for achieving peace building. So please, the next slide. So a brief overview of what is happening. As Maria presented, the knowledge we have about deforestation comes from different perspectives and from different scientific methods as well as different scales. But approaches for reducing deforestation come mainly from 3 or 4 basins, which are the biggest one and the more studied. So we generally promote or propose approaches for reducing deforestation based on that knowledge. However, drivers of deforestation are context specific, so we need to improve this approach and need to improve the specific activities we implement in the countries. So, and by the end, a good deal of conflict of countries with potential for reducing emissions from deforestation are experiencing conflict. That's a fact. For instance, my colleague from Philippines was telling me a couple of minutes ago about a conflict in an area of the country. I come from Peru, which is a country which is emerging from conflict as well, Colombia as well, and many other countries. Next slide, please. So the methods we use, we take Colombia as a case study. We perform a literature review about what drives deforestation, what literature have reported about drivers of deforestation, not only direct drivers, but as well underlying drivers of deforestation. And we develop time series clustering analysis. What does it mean? We group municipalities, which is a jurisdiction in Colombia, based on the dynamics of the forest trends. For doing that, we need data, which institutions like FIU provide us. And then we use artificial intelligence to understand the drivers of deforestation. The challenge here is that data on deforestation, on forest cover change, comes at a scale, and data on socioeconomics come at a different scale. So the first challenge is to put the data together so it can be used together. Next slide, please. So what we identified was 7 types of dynamics in the country, in dynamics of deforestation. Sometimes the groups of municipalities inside a dynamic are totally out of our mind. I mean, not necessarily, we were not expecting the groups we get. However, this is explained probably because different armed groups use forests in different ways. So this means that when peace or conflict happens, deforestation dynamics will be affected for the specific use that armed groups have for the forestry sector, for the forest sector. What we got was also that the peace agreement apparently has had a bad effect on deforestation dynamic. We can see by 2015 an increase in the deforestation trends, which is bad news for forest. Next slide, please. So some insights to understand deforestation drivers in times of conflict and peace. Coca production, cattle production, and municipality areas are the main drivers of deforestation in Colombia, the main direct drivers of deforestation. However, they apparently work in tandem. What does it mean? There is the underlying driver of deforestation behind these 3 drivers together is land grabbing, which we cannot see from data. And what we can see it is by understanding this with social economic data at municipal scale. But we would have to reduce the scale of analysis if we want to understand better these drivers. This can help us to inform policymakers to, for instance, develop approaches for delivering simultaneously forest conservation and peace building. And in fact, that is what we are doing. We are working with the government and implementing some projects to deliver these 2 development goals together. One slide, please. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Castro. Thank you for taking us through the complex dynamics of what peace and conflict mean for deforestation in Colombia. And I'm sure there'll be, many questions after our next panelist, who's Ray Thomas Kebbington. Tom serves as the chief of the environmental forestry section of the Forest Resources Conservation Divisions of the DENR FMB. He's been a forest management specialist since 2015, and he rose to the rank of supervising forest management specialist. He's one of the guiding force behind the effective protection, development, and conservation of forest land and watersheds in the Philippines. Mr. Cabington holds a Juris Doctor degree and is a licensed forester with a lot of experience representing the country in intergovernmental working groups and international sessions and fora on a variety of topics, including tropical timber, wildlife forests, etc. So, Tom, if you could tell us a little bit about what does the government support look to responsible business conduct in the pineapple sector in the Philippines?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom from the Philippines, and what I'm going to present now is how we were able to institutionalize the National Forest Monitoring System into policy in support of our target to be REDD+ ready and to participate in results-based payments. So next slide, please. So first off, what we did in the Philippines, especially in the Forest Management Bureau, is to focus on the various elements of REDD+ strategy and how we will be able to access results-based payments once we are considered as a REDD+ ready country. And one of the elements for a country to establish is the National Forest Monitoring System. So the National Forest Monitoring System has 3 elements. The first one, and our focus for this panel discussion, is the Satellite Land Monitoring System. So the Satellite Land Monitoring System uses satellite imaging and satellite and remote sensing in order to detect or to analyze land use and land use change. Well, there are 2 other elements, which is the National Forest Inventory and the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory. And for the information of everyone, and also from my colleagues here from FAO, the Philippines in 2021 has already adopted officially through a policy, through an administrative order, the Forest Resource Inventory as the National Forest Inventory of the Philippines in compliance with the REDD+ guidelines, and also the 2006 IPCC guidelines on greenhouse gas inventory, which was updated or revised in 2019 as the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory methodology for the Philippines. So what's left for us to develop and to enhance is a satellite land monitoring system. In the Philippines, there are current remote sensing monitoring and also mapping initiatives done by different sectors within the government. What we need to do in the satellite land monitoring system is to be able to develop a framework wherein everything is comprehensive and everything works together to be able to meet the requirements of the United Nations, which is that we need to produce an estimate of activity data using your SLMS every 2 years. Right now in the Philippines, we are able to produce land cover maps with a frequency of 5 years. So what we need to be able to implement REDD+ and to be able to access results-based payments is that we should be able to detect changes and also to project where the next change will occur, because that's where you have to put in your strategies to avoid deforestation, which will ultimately avoid emissions. So next slide, please. So some of the policy efforts that we had in the Philippines, we started in 2016 with the Lawin Forest and Biodiversity Monitoring Protection System. It is also institutionalized into a policy in 2018, if I believe so. So the Lawin monitoring system is basically like a micro monitoring system wherein you are able to monitor on the ground the forest condition, existing forest condition, the biodiversity health of a defined conservation area, and also detect threats within that conservation area. This is more focused, more on the ground monitoring, wherein the results from which can be used at the policy level in the national office to be able to address the prevailing threats. Right now we have 16, and we have also developed a response protocol for this, but most of the data gathered here should be and must be inputs to your policy. And for the next part of the timeline in 2021, we already have the policy on the National Forest Monitoring System as the national MRV of the Philippines, wherein I discussed earlier that we are trying to complete our SLMS as soon as possible. But as a precursor for the satellite land monitoring system, the Forest Management Bureau has developed its own tree cover model, the first of its kind in the Philippines, wherein it's a self-learning artificial intelligence machine, wherein you can input various satellite images from various sources and even locally developed ones, and then you will be able to produce your forest and non-forest maps for a certain given period of time. This is a good precursor for change detection in the government, which will be more sustainable because it is in-house, and we do not need to regularly seek out external assistance whenever we need to produce reports for our results-based payments. The upside here is that it is institutionalized in a policy, but then you always have to remember about sustainability and how it can last for a very long time. And for our last period in 2022, the National REDD+ Action Plan has been prepared by the Forest Management Bureau as well, wherein most of the results from 2016 up to the present time were incorporated and were considered in developing a REDD+ strategy, a REDD+ action plan for the Philippines. So next slide, please. Okay, so for that last slide, so I just want to close in saying that it's high time that we consider these types of technologies and tools in policy development, because we need to be more targeted and focused in developing policies in order to address the actual problem that we'd like to resolve. Gone are the days, I hope, that we develop policies just for the sake of having policy developed and not actually targeting anything on the ground. So thank you and good afternoon again.
Thank you. Thank you to you, Tom. Thank you. And what a really nice panel of experts. Really want to give them another round of applause. So with this, we're going to open the panel discussion. And I have the privilege of asking the first questions, but please, if you have some, keep them in mind because your turn will come, including for those of you who are listening online. So I'll start with Frédéric and Rémi. So what would you say, and it's a tough question, would be the top three technical and or practical challenge to ensure that the data on deforestation is made accessible to stakeholders, a whole range of stakeholders, the public entities, but also private companies, farmers, NGOs, etc. Which one of you would like to start, Rémi or Frédéric? Can you hear us, Frédéric? Rémi, I think Rémi has his, no, he said Frédéric. Frédéric, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks Estelle, thanks Rémi. Thanks for offering me the opportunity to start. What I will concentrate this answer to the question on technical challenge to this regulation, which is presently under adoption by the European Union, and I think we can easily complement on the mention the REDD+, the challenges related to REDD+. Is an expert on this. So I suppose that this regulation is not well known for the participants. So in the European Union, the regulation to try to minimize the impact of consumptions of commodities I mentioned earlier, like there are 5 key commodities which have been identified, which are the coffee, cocoa, cattle, the meat from the cattle, the wood, and the palm oil. So, and these are the key commodities which are representing the largest volume of these kind of biocommodities that are imported and consumed in the European Union. And so the European Union is putting in place, is in the phase of adoption, hopefully by the end of this year, of this regulation. And this regulation will have impact and will have to be implemented for its implementation, which means that there will be technical and practical challenges for the stakeholders, like in particular the private operators, the farmers and the private companies which are producing and sending commodities to the European Union. There will be these challenges to this kind of stakeholders, but also to the member states of the European Union that will have to monitor, to check the legality and if the commodities are compliant with the regulation. So first of all, what does mean, just not going in many details, but in that regulation, what will be imposed is that the key commodities that I've mentioned can be imported used in Europe if they are produced on land which was not forest before year 2020. So the first important point to understand is that there will be a reference year, which is the year 2020. And so for the set of technical challenges for the private operators, like the private operators, like the private companies and the farmers, they will have to collect, to collect information, document and data which are demonstrating that these commodities are compliant with the regulation. So in particular, in the information that they shall collect, there is the provision of the geolocalization coordinates of the land where the relevant commodities are produced. So it's important to understand that means in terms of practical technical challenges, in some cases, some large companies, they probably have already maps of the palm oil plantations. It can be the case in some cases, but in most of the cases or in number of cases, small farmers, farm holders or even companies do not have these maps or information on the geolocalization of the land where the commodities are produced. So that will be a main technical challenge for these private operators. So we'll have either to produce maps of cocoa fields, palm oil plantations, etc. They will have to produce this map either using Earth observation information or using field information like GPS, using the global positioning system to record, to register that information in the field. And this information, they will also to develop database or registry, digital registry for storing and transferring this information to the European Union member states, to the countries where the commodities are exported. The second, and I will just have a second set of technical challenges which are related to the member state, European Union member state themselves, that will have to designate competent authorities which will have in charge the checks, the monitoring of the declarations by the private operators. And so the member states, these competent authorities will have to check on the sample. They will not have to check everything, but they will have to check something like 5% sample of the declarations of the declaration by the operators of what will be provided, placed on the European Union market. And for these checks includes a number of types of checks, and one of them is they will have used any technical and scientific means to determine whether the relevant commodities or products are deforestation free, and including Earth observation or data, of course, such as the Copernicus data. It means that they will have to access to the best available satellite imagery and best available the finest resolution possible with the cloud-free imagery, optical cloud-free imagery for the reference year, for the year 2020, to ensure that the land where the commodities were produced were not forest in year 2020. And so the main challenge here is access. The technology exists, and it has been demonstrated by Remy and the other panelists, but we know that technology exists to produce maps of forest, but you need access to cloud-free and satellite imagery for the specific year 2020. And as I said, as finding the best, finest resolution possible. 10 meters is a good spatial resolution, but finest as possible is the best. And also to process and to analyze this data, you need to access to reference data, to the best available reference data, which can be either field data or the analysis of visual interpretation of satellite imagery, which on the sample of plots. This is feasible, but it's what would be practically the main task or the main challenge in establishing this kind of checks. I think I have been probably a bit long, and I will leave the floor to Remy for the complementing and extending this answer. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Frédéric.
Thanks, Fred. Yeah, maybe I'll just. Okay, so you looked at the specific angle of the deforestation-free communities, and I think it was a very comprehensive answer. So I will very brief in complementing. But I think one of the things we've seen as a blockage or as a potential problem to get data shared about deforestation, about trends, and how to make it useful at the land use planning level. I think this the first is to not underestimate the issues related to institutional functioning, and setting up data sharing agreements is something that is often underestimated. And in places where we work, in countries where we work, and where countries have put in place data sharing agreements before producing those data sets, it's been much easier to actually make the data accessible for a larger and public audience. So that's one aspect I wanted to bring. The second one is I think there's still some education or didactic efforts to be made on the differences between land cover and land use. And I think, and this is illustrated with the different graphs that we may have seen today. We've seen a mix of tree cover and forest data, and they're actually not the same things. And it's important that whenever data is being produced, that we clearly say whether it's land cover or it's land use. And my last point on what would be a recommendation to do to make data on those topics available and useful is to make sure that the metadata is also available with it, and that the methods are clearly explained. And I think, again, being as open as possible in the ways the data is produced is also a good guarantee that the data can be owned, because it can be trusted, it can be verified, and that's fundamental. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you. Are you comfortable naming countries with such data sharing agreements?
Am I what?
Are you comfortable sharing the names of those countries? Which countries?
Yes. Yeah, we actually have. So we have. There's a GEF project, a CBIT, a transparency project, where we're specifically looking at how the National Forest Monitoring System is performing, and how data is being used. And I work essentially in Africa, so I'll give that example. In Africa, we have like two countries, Uganda and Côte d'Ivoire. And Uganda has a fairly well-established institutional arrangement on data, and this is it's extremely it's been relatively simple for Uganda to set up a data around REDD+ and to produce BURs. And actually, Uganda is the first country in Africa that has submitted RBPs. On the other hand, Côte d'Ivoire, which is kind of similar in size and maybe not issues, but has a much more complex structure. And what we are working with now is on trying to make those data available, and the NFI data, the remote sensing data that is there, and it's a known issue. I mean, it's something that the country tries to overcome. But because they have not set that up in the first place, that's one of the things that is pulling them and dragging them behind.
Thank you, thanks. I'm now going to turn to our two other experts on the panel, Augusto and Tom. Could you give us practical examples, 1, 2, 3, on how forest monitoring tools based on remote sensing technologies actually facilitate what's happening on the ground, field work, social participation, and even policy design? I don't know which one of you wants to go first. It's Augusto.
Okay, thank you. I will provide 3 examples from my experience. The first one is fieldwork. Data from monitoring systems helped me to identify where to go to perform my PhD research, for instance. It helped me a lot. And not only to identify where to go, but also what to study. So then I can provide more details if I have the time. The second example is social dialogue. Data help us to facilitate dialogue, for instance, in the context of zero deforestation supply chain agreements. So talk with stakeholders, producers, different types of factors, who and where deforestation is happening is super useful. And when people see data, when actors see the data and perceive the data, they are more open to talk. And the third example is in the policy arena. And in the policy arena, we've been working in integrating forest conservation efforts for climate change mitigation, for biodiversity conservation, with sustainable development goals. And with data on forest cover changes, we were able to identify where in that territory priority areas for forest conservation overlap with other priority areas for other development goals. Those are my 3 examples.
Yes, and I think you have a little time if you want to give us more on your first one.
On the first one.
No, the first one. The first one from your own experience.
Sorry,
sorry. When you provided your 3 examples, you said I may elaborate a little bit on the first one.
Okay.
Yeah.
More details on where I will provide more details on my PhD research. That's something what's super important for me, and I got lost for various months trying to identify where to study, where to go. Then we got access to a database from the World Resources Institute, I believe, and that helped us to identify priority areas for forest conservation, but we also start identifying what was the context of countries with high priority for reducing deforestation and reducing emissions. And we managed to put together 2 data sets. One with data on conflict, one with data on forest cover changes. And afterward, we decided to go to one of these countries to perform research, and I picked Colombia. That was one of the greatest achievements of my career. Then the other examples are more practical and also useful, but not necessarily.
Thank you. No, that's great. Tom, do you want to try to tackle that one too?
Yeah, merci beaucoup. Okay, so for in the Philippines, and then based on my own opinion, there are 3 things that the results from remote sensing and these types of technology can aid policymakers like myself whenever we craft or draft policies using monitoring systems like this. Number 1 is targeted policy making. Like what I said earlier in my presentation, I think it's always better that when you develop policies, you have a target problem to resolve, not just in a general and broad strokes, but you will be able to develop frameworks and systems and safeguards and guidelines if you know and you can measure what these problems are. And we've been using various results of monitoring programs and systems in the Forest Management Bureau to be able to develop and to enhance or improve on our existing policies. But right now, we are trying to integrate as much as we can remote sensing tools and like the LAWIN monitoring system into our policy development and enhancements. The second one is it's a tool for lobbying as well, because like a lobbyist, we need information and we need basis and we need data in order to convince people and to convince decision makers and the top management that we need this policy, we need this program to work. And I can show you how or why, because I have these numbers, I have this data, I have these maps. It would be easier for them to understand if they can see it visually, and then you would now be able to lobby your policy into being institutionalized and soon after approved. And for the third thing is, we can use remote sensing and monitoring systems for investment options and developing investment windows and options, not only for the private sector, but also for the public sector. Because with the use of remote sensing and monitoring systems, we will be able to develop efficient fund allocation programs, and we will now be able to determine where the funds have to be put or prioritized compared to another area wherein other mechanisms for management can be applied and not necessarily putting into funds. So I think those 3 points are important to consider on whenever we think about the importance or the relationship of remote sensing and policy making and policy development. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you to both for, those really practical examples, including in the policy arena. Now I know some of you have been very impatient and have questions, so we'll open up even more that discussion. And I guess please raise your hand if you're in the physical audience here in Seoul. If you have questions, yes, we have one here. I think someone will pass you a mic to the lady here in blue. Okay, put it a little bit higher. Yep. Thank you. And I want to mention there's also 60 people on Zoom attending this.
Hello, my name is Graciela Tejada. I'm coming from Brazil, from the National Institute of Space Research, from INPE. I'm a postdoc there, and we were working in a project, the Carbon Project, where we have been measuring atmospheric greenhouse gases for a plane for 9 years. That's the project where I'm doing the postdoc, that is the Carbon Project. And last year we published a high impact paper on Nature, and our main conclusion is that Southeast Amazon forests are not anymore a carbon sink. They are becoming a carbon source. So I want to ask you, the panelists and the scientists, what do you think about it? My part in the project is just correlating the land use and coverage change data from remote sensing, even though Brazil has wonderful public data from deforestation that is PRODES, from degradation and real-time monitoring alerts, that is the GRAT, for, I think it's totally digital and online from 2007 for everyone. So even though I'm working with the land use change data, trying to understand, I want to hear your opinion about if really forests that are closer to deforestation and degradation are not longer a carbon sink. Thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations on that paper. It's a very sobering paper, but it's widely read. So who on the panel here would like to take this? So maybe Fred online. I don't know if if someone can tell me if Fred wants to speak, otherwise, maybe we'll start with here in the room.
I'll see what Fred wants to say. Fred, do you want to?
Maybe if you wish, I can just start quickly. What outside? Thanks for that very interesting questions. Outside the fact that the sink was partly balanced by the emissions from deforestation, not forest degradation. Probably what is happening, I heard from colleagues at GRC more specialized in that field, that with the temperature increase, the tropical forests are getting drier. The canopy is getting drier and suffering more, and probably that's also is linked as an effect on the sink, on the absorption by the carbon. They are functioning less. So there was in the last years there was an understanding that the tropical humid forests in particular were absorbing something like 0.5 ton of carbon per year, per hectare. And that's maybe has saturated due to the increase of the overall average increase of temperature everywhere in the world, where it has an effect on the top canopy of the trees. It seems that it's seen in particular on the water content of the top canopy. So that might be one of the drivers, one of the explanations outside the human effect, the direct human effect like deforestation and degradation. The indirect human effect due to the climate change, the climate increase of temperature may be an explanation for that. For that sink decrease, the fact that the sink is not anymore working well. So that's all from my side.
If I may, thank you for that wonderful intervention. And I think not only Brazil is experiencing that political and social dilemma on forests becoming emitters rather than sinks. Also in the Philippines, we've had that debate and discussion when we were preparing our national determined contribution submission. And I think it was considered that since the rate of deforestation in the Philippines is at this rate, we tended to consider the Philippine forests as emitters rather than sinks. But personally, I refuse to believe that it is so, because in being able to determine or even project that the Amazon rainforest and the Philippine tropical forest are currently on the way to being emitters rather than sinks, I think that should be a policy direction and a policy priority on the part of the government and also on the civil society in order to halt this type of degradation and to maintain that forests will always be carbon sinks. And this cannot be disregarded in national determined contributions, in reportings, and also in national and governmental discussions. Because if we consider forests as emitters rather than sinks, then we wouldn't have any natural carbon pools anymore and carbon sinks. We would be left with oceans, which is an equilibrium. And the most efficient and the most natural carbon sequestration process is with plants. And I think that's very elementary and basic, and we should always consider that whenever we hear or we debate on whether forests and compared to the rate of deforestation it is experiencing right now, whether it should be classified as a carbon emitter rather than a sink. So thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to?
I think there's science that is looking at how forests are actually having their fluxes, and we know that degraded forests are more sensitive to climate change, and that they can, when they're the balance of the forest is actually fragile, and when forests do get too degraded, and when the temperature balance is getting worse, they can actually turn into emitters. And I think what's most important there is to use that kind of data to really understand the importance of restoring those places and those landscapes. And we're in the decade of ecosystem restoration, and I'm not sure I totally agree with Tom on that. The fact we should always consider them. I think we should still not be blind to the fact that they are also fragile ecosystems, and that when there is too much degradation, they could turn into reverse machines regarding climate change. So I think we should use those arguments to really advocate for also restoring those places. We need to protect what's protected, and there was a very interesting event yesterday on how the Congo Basin forest, which is quite still relatively not fragmented, is still working properly as it's for its carbon functions. It's really important to protect those, but in the places where forests have undergone heavy degradation, it's really important that we also, in parallel, work for restoration.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there another question in the room? Because I know there's one online, but I'd like to take one maybe from the floor here. Okay, there's, ooh, I think I have to give it to this gentleman who raised his hand first. So, person here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Melvin Lippe. I'm from the Thünen Institute in Hamburg, Germany, for forestry. I'm a senior scientist, and for the past 5 years, we have worked in the Philippines a lot. So I'm very intrigued, actually, about this new monitoring system, and I would like to know what satellite sensors are you going to use? Are you using SAR-based approaches? You mentioned AI, and of course, as Remy also mentioned, will this data become publicly available also for scientists like us? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the tree cover model that we developed in 2020 was with the aid and help of the University of the Philippines and also local remote sensing experts. Right now, it's being improved because the machine has only been able to access, to interpret satellite images from MODIS and also Sentinel. But the Ministry of Science and Technology in the Philippines gave us access to their LiDAR data and LiDAR signature. And right now we are trying to develop a part of the machine to be able to produce accuracy assessments and also to be able to compare it with other maps and images that will be produced, like for example, with FAO and NASA. So right now it's not being fully implemented yet because we are still looking into how we can integrate it with the current mapping system in the Philippines. So that's something that we can look forward to, and maybe in the next World Forestry Congress would be able to share results already. So we'd be very pleased to partner with leading scientists, especially from Germany, as you have very advanced remote sensing technology and how to help us here in developing, because the tree cover model is not the entirety of the satellite land monitoring system. It only measures your forest and non-forest. What the satellite land monitoring system requires is that you be able to detect actual land use change for a given period of time. And I think that's something that we can work on in the future, hopefully near future, because we really need to complete this at the soonest time possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So I'm going to give you a chance to ask a question. And I know there was a question in the back, and there's one online. Yep, one in the back, one here. There's one online, and then I'll ask our superheroes panelists to answer all 3 questions in 7 minutes. So let's start with the lady in the back, then you, then I'll read the one that we have online.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk. And thank you for the talk. It was very useful. My name is Sujin Kim, and I work at ClimateWorks Foundation. And my question is actually for Augusto. So I was curious, so we've seen so much in the lead up to COP27 that there have been so many pledges that could, potentially be very opportunistic to bring together actors from forestry and agriculture domain. And I see that there are bits and pieces of work that is being done by different countries. UK, the EU, and the US to begin with. And I'm wondering, what do you think that is needed in terms of political momentum to bring all these existing pledges and initiatives together to implement something more meaningful? Thank you.
Thank you. While the mic is passed on to the gentleman here, I'll read one that we got online. I think it's from Ricardo Dominguez Llosa, and it's directed to Remy. Can those tools that you've developed be used in the Pacific? That could be a short yes and no.
Maybe I start with this one. Yeah, answer is yes. Methods out there, the totally replicable, and we're making sure that the tutorials to implement them are also there. So check out the website that is there. See if you can sort out how to use those, and just feel free to contact us also if there's any support needed.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Suneet Bhardwaj from Government of India. Right now, we discussed regarding various technological tools which can help us in assessing the status of deforestation. But apart from these tools, I think we need to give specific emphasis on various social, cultural, as well as economic drivers of deforestation. So has there been some study in this regard? Do we have some data on these factors? Because technology, the tools we are talking about, they are good for assessing what has happened over a period of time. But in order to put a check on deforestation, we need to analyze the actual drivers, what these drivers are. So are we working on in that direction? If so, what is the data and what are the inferences we have drawn so far?
Thank you, and thanks for your patience. So you actually now have 3 minutes to answer those two questions. One was directed directly to you, Augusto. Do you want to take it first?
Yes, thank you so much for your question. I am not a politician, so maybe I don't know how to respond it more clearly. What I can say is that as a scientist, what we develop is evidence, and when the evidence is strong, then we may have the opportunity to convince stakeholders and get broader attention, a broader support for specific agenda we want to move forward. In that regard, what we can do is continue this science part of the work and hope that political actors can get the information needed to continue the discussions.
Thank you, Augusto. On the second question, Feli?
Maybe I can quickly address your questions on underlying drivers. Actually, Maria Sanchez at BC3 is leading some very interesting work on how to link fluxes of commodities and related data with deforestation. There's MRIO models that are out there, and I know they're working also on trying to go a little bit deeper in spatializing it so that we could have this type of information could be spatial. So I would encourage you to look at what BC3 is doing on this. And on this, there are methods to try to link those kind of variables spatially when you're looking at specific underlying drivers. I guess there is still some research that needs to be done on this. I think it's still a work in progress. But in the Central African Forest Initiative, for instance, we're testing this, and we're trying to get some inspiration of the MRIO models that Maria is dealing with, and linking them. So yeah, there is some work being done. Just like that would be the short answer.
Yeah, if I may. Yes, actually in the Philippines, if you remember from my presentation about the Lawin Forest and Biodiversity Monitoring System, we developed a response protocol in order to address the threats that were being monitored and reported in your conservation area. And the novel fact and the novel part of this response protocol is that it's divided into two parts. One is the punitive approach, or the more legal side of responding to these threats. And the second part is the developmental approach, or the more social, cultural, and resolution through various techniques and modes of social science and social participation. So the reason why we did that in the Forest Management Bureau is because we didn't want to limit our response to purely punitive and legal approaches, because if we will target to prosecute all the illegal loggers, illegal logging activities in the Philippine forest, we wouldn't have any more land area, because we need to develop more jails for that case. So, so that's another driver of deforestation in that case. So that's why the social aspect, especially social forestry, is very important in these types of discussions, because as you said earlier, and it is right in your question, that you also need to consider cultural, social, and developmental approaches when it comes to responding to threats. because there are also threats that stem out from lack of social mobility, social preparation, cultural awareness, especially with indigenous cultural communities and your local forest communities. So thank you.
Yep, very quickly.
Yeah, underlying drivers of deforestation is pretty hard, mainly because of the scale of analysis. We have a bunch of data sources about forest cover changes. However, and that data comes at a scale of a pixel, no? 30 for 30 or many other sizes. However, data on social economics comes at a jurisdictional scale. So depending on the scale of analysis you want to do the analysis, that would maybe easy or no, or not easy. At this moment, we are trying to implement the methodology I presented you before for understanding underlying drivers of deforestation at global scale. And the main challenge, again, is the data. At more local scale, we are doing analysis trying to integrate data on forest cover changes with socioeconomic data performed with focus groups. And it's also it's difficult to integrate these two types of data sets. However, methods are evolving, and I'm sure that soon we will be able to develop some approaches to address this specific research question and gap.
Thank you. Thank you, and sorry for rushing you. I really wanted to keep some time for the concluding remarks from Arild Engelsen. He's joining us online. You may know him. He's a professor of economics at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences and a senior associate at the Center for International Forestry Research, CIFOR, in Indonesia. He's done extensive research on the causes of tropical deforestation and its interaction with poverty, with tenure, with government policies. And his most recent work deals with how efforts for reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, that, you know, the REDD+ acronym, can be included in a global climate regime and the national strategies and policies needed to achieve REDD+. He has edited 4 REDD books that have become standard references in the debate, and he has broad field experience from Southeast Asia and Eastern Africa. Arild, I hope you can hear us for your reflections on the country presentations and the topics discussed. Yes.
Yes, I can. Sorry if you hear me well. So thank you for the opportunity to give a few closing remarks. Of course, I cannot summarize. This has been kind of a session with an optimistic tone on the role of data to better understand and deal with deforestation and forest degradation. So I'm still an optimist, but let me add a few caveats in 3 points here. First, I think numbers are the best way to understand the world. They are important for policy making, for implementation, and not at least to evaluate the policies. And we have made huge progress, as exemplified by Maria on the overall and Tom from the Philippines. But I also say that maybe there hasn't been the same growth in knowledge and insights as has been the growth in data. And there are experimental studies in other areas where they show that if we give more information to people, we think we kind of overestimate how much we know, and we are braver and we take more risk because we have kind of this information fallacy. Data that we have so much of is not kind of followed by an equivalent increase in the knowledge. So we should just be aware of that. And I've experienced it myself. I mean, big data does not automatically give big analysis and big and new conclusions. I think a lot of the things that was written 20 years ago, it's still kind of past the test of time. That is not to say that we have a few new areas where we really have made kind of new insights. For example, on the carbon footprints through trade and how my consumption in Norway impacts the fate of the forest in the Amazon. And EU has really played a leading role, as we heard from Fredrik Rashad here. I think, so this is kind of the nuanced view of data. Data do not speak for themselves. It need to be analyzed, and they need to be beaten until they confess and tell a story. I think also there's another very important aspect. I'm glad that I think it was Augusto who mentioned it on the three practical examples, that data provide a very nice platform for policy dialogue, because data are, although I would disagree with that assumption, but data are conceived to be kind of neutral, and it is a kind of a non-threatening platform to start a dialogue with policymakers and different stakeholders. So we have the data, what to make out of that. So my second point is that when we have the numbers, it's just one of the ingredients to make a kind of make a good analysis. As it says, a pile of stone does not make a castle, so a lot of data does not make necessarily a good analysis. It's the capacity to do that, and an impact assessment, for example, to evaluate policies and projects. It is difficult. It's difficult even in theory, not to think about practice. For example, I've been involved in the RED work, and since RED started 15 years ago, I think the evidence of what works is still weak. We do not yet fully understand, kind of, for example, how projects and even more policies at the national scale work. We are getting better, but I think the involvement of researchers from early stages in project and policies to get baseline data, for example, not just on forests, but also on socioeconomic conditions, which are kind of much weaker data, that involvement has not been there. My third point is that number is also politics. Sometimes it sees kind of, facts and figures as a neutral thing. But there are a lot of choices. For example, just what we focus on. When we select the numbers, the biases, how we deal with uncertainty, how we present it, how we interpret it, and the way it's used. All these are examples of kind of subjective and quite often political choices that we make. One simple example, both for deforestation and for climate, is how do we stress the uncertainty in data? In general, if we are honest about uncertainty, it often serves to delay political action. So I think uncertainty is often under kind of stressed. That should be stressed more when we present things. But we also know that it may serve the opposite political or have the opposite political effect than what we personally think they should do. It's often part of a conflict, of a struggle, of land, of resources. And another example from Augusto was of course an extreme example from Colombia, where it's a part of struggle for land and even deeper, wider conflicts. But it can also be struggles between different sexual ministries and between levels of government. So numbers enter kind of politics very quickly. I think the response to all this is transparency, and have a diversity of actors, and have an active debate on what the world looks like. Some talk about the democratization of information, but it's also a democratization and in the sense of a diversity in the capacity of those who can use that information and play and really do that. I think it's also a final point we should note when we have that the rights and to produce, or the right or the capacity to produce and to use data, it also yields power to those who are able to use it. And a nice quote from Robert Chambers a few years ago, where he said that counting promotes the counter and demotes the counted. So counting promotes the counter and demotes the counted. So there is also, I think, an aspect of that we should be aware of. In spite of kind of data being that there are some worrying trends of, you see, we have kind of this dual trends of there's both more openness and more data available, particularly GIS-based data on land use and land cover. And these are being available at a scale, magnitude that we could only dream about a few years ago. But there is at the same time also a trend the opposite about kind of monopolization in the production of dissemination and numbers. In particular, when it comes to indirect drivers linking to tenure, to land rights, to governance, to policies, where it's also getting sensitive and part of this kind of politicization of numbers. There have been a few French in the panel, so let me just end my small intervention with a nice quote from Alfred de Fauville that he wrote, and this is 130 years ago. So the French were kind of ahead where he wrote in the Journal of the Statistical Society of Paris. And the title of his paper then was The Role of Statistics in the Present and in the Future. And he said like this 130 years ago, 1892. When the struggle resurfaces between the champions of the general interest and that of private interest, you will find us, the statisticians, at our post, armed and ready to march. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Engelson, for these very clear reflections and take-home messages. I just want to check if we have time for the video. We do. Okay, while we set this up, I wanted to mention there were 140 of you either here or online. Thank you so much, and congratulations to all of our speakers. So with this is goodbye for me. It's really been a pleasure, and we'll leave you with that video for the time being. See you very soon. See you soon, very soon.
On the northwestern part of Lake Victoria in Uganda are 84 islands that make up Kalangala district. It covers an area of 9,103 square kilometers, 5.1% of which is land and the rest is water. The waters and the land are all the communities depend on. Bogala Island is the largest, covering 29,000 hectares, and was once the lush green landscape of savannas and moist evergreen forests. Currently, over 10,000 hectares of land has been turned into oil palm farms, whose expansion continues.
Yeah, it has changed a lot. Much forest cover has been destructed because of the other developments and practices, mainly the agricultural practices that were transferred in Kalangala. We find that many people, time back, where the main activity was fishing. They used it to grow some little cassava, some little potatoes, and some bananas. Now, as a development came, they introduced what we call the oil palm project. This is under the management of Oil Palm Uganda Limited, that is OPUL. And this is under Bidco Kenya, and actually under Willima. So it's a big project. In fact, the initial packaging of the oil palm was so good that it could leave everybody involved in the oil palm project. But eventually when it started, things changed and they are not as they were promised.
The project came with a lot of promise on the horizon, with many selling large chunks of their land for this shift in economic activity. Oil palm is now the second biggest employer for both wedged and casual laborers on the island.
Oil palm growing has been partially profit. You know, oil palm growing got when I had my money. For those who did not have money completely, I'm seeing their life changing, though at a gradual process.
But this has come at a cost to the environment. As the demand for land to cultivate more palms increased, more forested areas were encroached on. In less than a decade, the landscape of this island has significantly changed.
In Kalangala, when this project came in, of course there was acquisition of land for the project. The private forests, because these are owned by people, those who wanted to go into oil palm, they changed the land use from the forested area to an agricultural area. In one way or another, biodiversity has been affected.
The over-reliance on oil palm growing has also threatened food security. The area previously known for growing food crops like sweet potatoes and bananas is now relying on the produce ferried in from the mainland.
Due to revolution of oil palm, people have resorted to farming. So farming is just peaking in Kalangala. So when you look at production of food and the demand is big than the production.
The forests were cut. Of course, you cannot grow palm oil in the forest because they cannot be there together. So they had to remove the indigenous trees and they grew palm oil. But the challenges we found that the animal species which were there are no longer there, and we have got a threat like food insecurity when it comes to monkeys. When monkeys were chased in the forest, they started invading people, eating their food and coconuts. Some lorries might be on the way, others are crossing tomorrow. That's how we are. You can find the market without food because we don't have enough food here.
The land question is one that has remained unresolved to date, as it has been revealed that over 80% of the landowners who sold their land did not do so under the conditions of free, prior and informed consent.
Ziri zonna ezo zolaba wali ennyimiro za Bidiko zonna zaali nnimiro naffe tulimayo eri ne batuleka mu kabangiriza kano koolaba. Ate ffe tulina emmere gye tulya, emmere tugulangule. Ffe tetukyalima mmere wano kubanga wonna abayindi baatwalawo, ffe tetukyalinawo mmere, abayindi baatwalawo wano wonna. Era ffe tulina we tulima nti nno wano, wabula tulima ku buno obutimba era bwe zibula.
Some sections of the community are unhappy having surrendered large chunks of their land for the oil palm project, but with incomplete payments. A number of landowners, though, have stood their ground and rejected selling this much prized possession and are now rallying other colleagues to follow suit.
I think I'm happy by myself that I'm living behind the land. First of all, I'm interested in the trees. I don't think I've deprived my family of food because they have food and the trees are there. I mean, I've learned lessons from people around me, but I recognize that land is a precious asset. I won't sell my land. I'll utilize it wisely.
Land is an important asset in ensuring food security and the community's livelihoods. Preserve it for food and sustainable livelihoods that are environmentally friendly.